I was tempted to put this series at the top because I feel like I'm hitting the low-hanging fruit by putting the series we'll speak about last. At the same time, I don't want to be the homer here. Knicks versus Hawks, 4v5 in the East. I don't know that I have a feel for this series. Do you?
I don't. Well, I think part of it's because here's my main concern. First of all, you are an enormous homer for this to be your second most interesting series.
Really?
Uh,
Trae Young in the playoffs? How do they defend Julius Randle?
I think no, I'm just kidding. I think it is interesting because of how much we don't know. Because this is,
And it's kind of dead
there's
even.
just
They
so
have
many.
the same record.
Yes, where I think I read today they were like their point differentials would have been identical if one or the other had scored a single point in the season, like one more point in the year. So they're just like
That's wild.
not mirror images because they're very different teams. But I wonder. So here's my main, and there's not a stat for this, so just take this and do with it what you will. I wonder how much how much the Knicks might suffer from not having another gear. Like it's such a cliche, but and I'm sure you've even heard this argument, but it rings true to me that part of the reason the Knicks were so good this year and so surprising is that Thibodeau had them playing their asses off all the time, and their defense was wired tight to like a playoff level of intensity and attention to detail all the time, and they had to because they just didn't have elite defensive personnel. Some they have good defenders, some very good, but I think they succeeded. Randle being twice the player he used to be was a huge factor, and some hits in other areas. But the defense was just on 100. I don't know if they have 110. So I think, and I don't know if that's the case with the Hawks or most other playoff teams. So I just wonder if we've seen the best version of the Knicks, and we know that it's about as good as the regular season version of the Hawks, and on the theory that the Hawks can be better than that when they play their best guys and whatever all the other they're focused in the playoffs and they can scout and blah blah blah. So that I think if you're looking at these two teams as even, I think that's where I would draw the potential point of separation is that I think the Knicks are like maxed out, and so I don't know how much better they can be.
Yeah, it's how do you increase, and I think it was John Hollinger who pointed this out for The Athletic, how do you increase Julius Randle's minutes when he was playing 38 a game already? How much?
That's another thing. They've already played all their best guys like playoff rotation type style. So great. That's a great point.
I think what this works against them because they play so slow. They were 30th in average possession time in the league this year, 29th after the trade deadline, so playing a lot faster. I don't know that you talk about the lack of the offensive gear, lack of a different gear in general. Maybe they have it defensively because I think we've seen it. Everyone talks about their shot profile, allowing too many looks at the rim, too many threes. When you really dug into them, especially later on in the year, the shots at the rim, Nerlens Noel is just going to eat those for breakfast anyway. From beyond the arc, they're like really selective on. They help off from different spots, it seems like, and they'll chase guys off the above the break looks. And so I think their defense is even better than people assume and should be fine in the playoffs. Who do you have if you're the Hawks to throw at Julius Randle is the other question. Do you trust Clint Capela on switches? I don't think it can be John Collins as okay as he's been on defense this year. It can be DeAndre Hunter in theory. How many minutes are you getting from him after he missed so much time with his injury? I think it was a knee injury, right? So Randall's been hitting tough shots all year. I'm wondering if he can actually just dice up the Hawks and have an easier time than normal. That will really help them. But the Knicks, and then the other question here is, who's defending Derrick Rose? Been spectacular for the Knicks. And are they going to, how much, we know Derrick Rose will play with the starters. How much do they lean on the bench units that were so good for them? It was either RJ Barrett plus bench units started killing people towards the end of the season. They've done Julius Randle versus every bench because I do think Emmanuel Quickley and Derrick Rose playing them at the same time, that puts the Hawks in some dicey situations. Chris Dunn wasn't really a part of the rotation towards the end of the year, I don't believe, even after he came back from injury. He would be a natural option for them to go after that with, but Cam Reddish still hurt. So how would you defend that backcourt if you're Atlanta? I think the Knicks offense can, I don't think it's going to have a higher ceiling. I think it can maintain the higher level of efficiency it was already playing with post All-Star break there. I'm still just hesitant to pick them because Bojan Bogdanovic has been just absolutely on fire. You have Trae Young. You have Kevin Huerter. They can do a lot of different things in motion on offense. Reggie Bullock has been fantastic. He'll help. I think RJ Barrett will do well off the ball. It feels like they're one guy short. And I'm going to tell you right now, my X factor for the Knicks, surprise, surprise, is Frank Ntilikina. And if you're not playing Frank Ntilikina in this series at least 15 minutes a game, the chances of you winning it to me are exponentially lower. This is my homerism coming out, I'm sure. Who else is suited to go after Trae Young, though, on this team? Who?
No, that's a great. I mean, that's a great point but I do think.
You're tripped up. You weren't expecting to do the Frank Ntilikina deep dive.
No,
I could tell.
It ties into one of the things I was going to get to, which is that this is maybe one of the biggest angles of the series is what's Trae Young going to look like against a playoff defense that tries to get the ball out of his hands? So I don't think there's going to be one guy most of the time on him. I think you'll see a lot of traps, and I think you'll see, and this is why I'll just say DeAndre Hunter's my X factor on both ends, which is really scary given the huge injury-based interruption to his season this year, because I think that is the guy you probably hope can bother Randle the most, because I don't think you want Capela out there. I think he's got other stuff he needs to be doing, and I don't think he's mobile enough to stay with Randle. So it's big on that end. It's big on the other end, because if you are forcing the ball out of Trae Young's hands, Bogdanović, sure, fine, totally capable. We'll see how many minutes they match him up with Young, because I think you might want him playing a lot of second unit minutes. But then that's going to fall to Hunter to create too. And that was one of the biggest parts of his, early season leap, where it was just like, man, this guy is suddenly, one of the 5 best young 3-and-D wings that kid has some off the bounce stuff. And like, I was so sold on him before he got hurt. He's going to have to play make a little bit too, because I think Ntilikina clearly is the best option to put on Trae if it has to be one guy.
And look, the only thing I'm going to say really quickly on that, to interject, is that if that is in any way something that we are saying, he should have been a more integral part of the rotation during the regular season. That's all I'm going to say. Carry on, please.
No, I'm always here for Frankie Smokes propaganda. That's what I come to you for.
We are the official podcast of Frankie Smokes propaganda, so you've come to the right place.
It's a good place to be. I think Hunter's really important, and that's probably the scariest part of all this. The Knicks X factor, I don't know who. I guess I can't say Ntilikina. I don't know. It's interesting for them, because it's like you can't. I won't pick a defensive guy because they're just such a cohesive kind of defensive unit. I guess it would be Noel. Is he going to be as dominant defensively as Capela? Can he play a bunch of minutes? I don't know. I guess maybe it's quickly, just because I'd like to see how he sustains his effectiveness against a playoff defense. I feel like I keep going back to that, but I just can't. I've never been more convinced that the playoffs are just different. And so what you think you know about a player, especially a rookie, you can't really verify that until you see what happens in the playoffs. So I'd be curious if he is similarly effective, if it's Young on him, if he can sort of make Young work and tire him out. That seems like that might be important if you're trying to slow Atlanta down on offense. I don't know. I think this will be a good series. I feel bad for giving you shit about picking it as your second most interesting, because we've had a lot to say about it.
Yeah, look, you could go. I think you can go with RJ Barrett or Bullock as another X factor too, because I'm assuming one of those guys sees a ton of time on Bogdanović. Maybe Bullock sees a ton of time on Trae Young if the Knicks don't play Ntilikina in the first place. Maybe even Barrett does too. I'd say it's probably more likely Bullock. The other thing here is, though, how often you could say Tibbs, is Elfrid Payton playing ever in this series? And I want to make it clear that because it's a pandemic season, because Elfrid Payton seems all over the place on the court, I don't necessarily want to dump all over him, to borrow a phrase from before, but he's been fucking awful this year for them. They are a minus 83 points this year when he's on the court. They're a plus 245 when he's off. I know a lot of those are bench minutes. I don't fucking care, because we've seen Rose play with the starters and they've annihilated people. I'm not even saying start Rose. Start Frank Ntilikina. Shocker. Novel, I know. And I understand the thought process behind starting someone like Payton. Theoretically get you into your offense where Ntilikina will not. And then it saves. You have Derrick Rose, gives you an edge off the bench. And I do think they really like the idea of giving IQ and Rose minutes together because of how much of a mismatch that they could be. Now's not the time to do that. Just up the minutes of Derrick Rose. Just start him if you want, and then just play him a ton extra minutes and hope that his efficiency holds. But that's something that could lose the Knicks the series if Elfrid Payton is going to play, a ceremonial 15 minutes a game.
So Payton has been one of the most inexplicable starters to me that's kept his job on any team all year.
Keith Bogans doesn't even understand it.
We may have to. Can you explain why? Because I agree, Payton, the numbers say it, and just his individual numbers make you wonder, why on earth is this guy starting for a playoff team all the time? So because Randle can do so much with the ball, and because in theory, Barrett, actually, that's kind of the theory of Barrett, right? Is that he's capable of, doing something with the ball. He's not a standstill shooter, although he's gotten better as a shooter, obviously. Why haven't the Knicks messed around with no point guard? Just, get another wing out there that can defend, even if it's Ntilikina. I mean, because he's not really a point guard.
He's whatever you need him to be, Grant.
He's everything and more. I just don't understand why they haven't gone away from a conventional point guard, because it seems like they got enough playmaking in sort of unconventional ways.
And I also wonder, there's no stat behind this, but if you pull Elfrid Payton and put in Frank Ntilikina, put in Alec Burks. If you put in, let's say, Frank Ntilikina, someone who's not going to get into the offense, does it force, because RJ Barrett's really good, especially when he puts more pressure on the rim, and he's been more consistent about it, but there are games where I feel like if he doesn't do it early, he just doesn't do it as much. By not having another ball handler in that starting unit, does it kind of force him to do that more? And maybe now's not the time to test it out, but if the alternative is playing Elfrid Payton, then yeah, now would be the time to test it out. My official pick here, though, I have Hunter as the X factor for the Hawks, by the way. I do think it could be Bogdanović if you're looking at who do you need to be the second best offensive player to win if Trae Young's floaters aren't falling because of the Knicks contests. I guess you could throw Gallo in there too if you really wanted to, but Hunter, just what he's going to have to do defensively, and they're going to need him to do stuff offensively as well. I'm going Hawks in 7 here. I wanted to pick, my heart wants Knicks in 7, but the math here just doesn't keep working out, and if you told me that Tibbs wasn't going to play Elfrid Payton, I'm going to tell you right now, I'd pick the Knicks in 7. And the fact that I can't get, if so, we can save it. Maybe I'll change it after the opening tip of game 1. If Elfrid Payton is not on the court with 11 minutes left in the first quarter, I will pivot to the Knicks in 7.
It's very unsatisfying that I also picked the Hawks in 7, and it was like a throw my hands up pick, because obviously we've kind of explained why who the fuck knows what's going to happen in this series. But yeah, it's really phenomenal to know that a series is going to swing on Elfrid Payton, and not in a good way.
Or Frank Ntilikina in a great way. One or the other.
Right. That would be the good way.